Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Current Culture Podcast. I'm your host, China, and today we have a very special episode for you all. We have a very special guest and someone who is very near and dear to my heart, the great Ethel Morgan Smith. So let me give you a little rundown. Ethel Morgan Smith is someone who has written a lot of creative nonfiction and is a multi-published author, having written From Whence Cometh My Help, the African American Community at Hollins College, which was also adapted into African Violets, which was a stage play, as well as Reflections of Other, Being Black in Germany, and Path to Grace, Reimagining the Civil Rights Movement, which won a Eudora Welty Prize, might I add, just saying, as well as doing multiple publications that were in the New York Times, the African American Review, and there are many more publications that would take a lot of time for me to be able to get through, and being a Fulbright Fellow, a Rockefeller Fellow, and a 2-time National Endowment of the Humanities grants. And even that is not the full list, as well as writing multiple fiction pieces, essays, and being a professor on top of that. So without further ado, I would like to invite the great Ethel Morgan Smith onto our podcast today.
Well, thank you. I was listening and going, who is she talking about? When you were naming us, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm just thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled with your project. Congratulations. I've been excited about this ever since you told me. So thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. Now, I'm a little biased, so I'm kind of going to introduce the audience to you the same way you were introduced to me. So I'm going to flex a little bit of the shared history. Sorry. So the way that I got
it, you can do whatever you want.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
No, you can do whatever you want. It's your show.
Thank you for that reminder. I needed it. So the way that I was introduced to the great Ethel Morgan Smith was as a young freshman in university. I was studying about Holland's history, and I was like, wow, I want to study about the history of enslavement on this campus. And there's a lot of research that needs to be done here. And I'm like, who has done this before? And one of my advisors had come up to me and they said, hey, it sounds like the research that you're doing sounds a lot like the research that Ethel Morgan Smith had done. And I was like, who is that? And then they sat me down and were like, hold on, let me get you a book. And lo and behold, that book changed the entire trajectory of my college career. So it is safe to say that without Ethel and without From Whence Cometh My Help, I would not have graduated in the same fashion. I definitely would not have produced the Holland's Living History Project, which is one of my proudest pieces, without your contributions to the literary field. So just had to flex our history. It's just one of those things. Just had to flex it.
I am so happy and proud of you for what you did, because a good number of students have come through the program now, and you were the one who said, oh, this is what I'm going to do, and you did it. It's so impressive.
Honestly, I would not have found my way without your guidance. It was due to the research that you had already put together that I was able to find my way, because I was going through the archives, and it was learning the process of how to go through the archives. But knowing that someone had already, because that was the question that I had, and I feel especially in the time of Black History Month, I feel the idea of cycles and standing on the tops of the shoulders of our elders is such an important concept during Black History Month. So that was one of the first questions I had whenever being on campus as a student was, someone has had to have asked these questions before. So, and lo and behold, there was someone who had asked these questions before. And she had written an entire book about these questions. So I did not need to start from scratch. There is someone who already did so much legwork for me.
And just remember, you're carrying the torch for the next person who's going to come along and do exactly what you did and say, Is there this here? Is that that? So that's exactly how I wrote that book. I was a 37-year-old graduate student, and there were whispers around the college about slavery, and I just kept pursuing most of my professors told me no, that wasn't there wasn't such an event. And I go, oh please. So I just kept poking, kept researching, going through stacks, going through the libraries downtown Roanoke, the green room. That was a really fascinating place for me. I spent months in there just going through diaries and things that young students had left. But it all worked out. There's never too much research. There's never too much research. Even if it's not related to the project that you're working on, just put it over here because soon you'll be working on another project. So
I totally see you. And something that I was curious about while working on this is because I feel like there's a moment whenever you're working on a project that you're like, this is something I have to do.
that's
And
right.
definitely, I know the moment for me when this happened was one whenever they had the class like unveiling the past at Hollins, like your book was something that they would teach during the class and that they would introduce. But that was what got me like interested and I started researching this. But like there was a moment where I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to dedicate the rest of my time was. And I feel like that moment for me was learning about the unmarked grave, like right outside of campus, knowing
Right
that
out
there
in
was.
the back door of the campus.
Yes, and especially after like having passed by so many monuments and having like so many plaques on campus to like people who were known enslavers, but it's like there's so many names. And then knowing that right outside of our campus, we have literally hundreds of names, hundred of people whose names have never been known. And then standing on that ground makes it so visceral and so real. And for me, like that was the moment that I was like, oh, well, this is what I'm going to dedicate the rest of my time at Hollins to studying. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm kind of curious, what was your moment when you were like, well, this is what I'm doing? Like, this book is going to be made.
Well, it took a while. Um, when I first got to Hollins, they had before I got there, when I was applying, they had a screenplay program. And I had spent some time at the UCLA screenwriting and worked with Norman Cohen, old radio guy, was terrific. And when I got to Hollins, Richard Dillard tells me, well, the screenplay guy packed up his Toyota and moved to Alaska. So he said, you can study poetry or fiction. And this is in the late 80s, right? So it was like there was no such thing as creative nonfiction. So I said, well, I guess it's going to have to be fiction since I've never written a poem. I've read poetry. But anyway, so I was curious about the neighborhood in the back door of the college. And I would sit in what's the building with all the rocking chairs that you sit outside? At
Maine.
Holland. And I would just sit there and listen. And it was always noise. It was noise of work. And it was Black people who were doing the cutting, the cutting the grass, the cutting the bushes, all the noise that was being made, taking care of the lawns. And then the same thing happened in the cafeteria. There were Black people working in the cafeteria. And then someone told me about the community. It was called Oldfield, and now they've changed it to the Hollins community because Oldfield is a term that applies to slavery. You can read any slave narrative and learn about Oldfields, Old the Narrows, the Bottom, all those kind of terms that we see in the literature of Ernest Gaines, Toni Morrison, and Ann Petrie, so many other writers. So I knew that slavery was there because they had this name Oldfield, land that is not good anymore. So they sent people who were enslaved to live in that land. But in the beginning, the young women who came to school there, they would bring enslaved person with them. And this is a person who's gotten old, maybe too old to do the work in the house, in the plantations where she was. And they actually lived in the rooms with the young women to comb their hair, the lassies, as they call them, to take out their slop jars, all these kinds of things. But as the college grew, uh, that could no longer happen. They had to do something. So first there were little houses down by the horse stables, and a lot of them lived there. And then once again, as the college grew, there had to be a community. So they put the community in the back door of the college, and they would place rocks um, from the college to the community. So if the children needed to come to the college for their parents, they didn't have to go on the main road. So it was called Rocky Branch, that area was called. So all these names came from someplace. And not a lot of people talked to me from the community in the beginning. But you only need one. And then that was Mrs. Bruce. And then there was Mr. Smith. And then there were others as they came forward to talk to me about their history. And they were very, very well versed. You know, we think of Hollins today as Hollins in Roanoke. They didn't. It was a long ways. They referred to, well, she doesn't live here anymore. And I said, well, where does she live? She lives up in Roanoke. You know, it was just interesting how isolated Hollins was at the time. So that was the beginning, and I just kept digging, kept on talking to people, interviewing people. Mary Bishop, who was a reporter at the Roanoke Times during the time, she wrote an article about my work, and that opened another door. Women who had gone to school there and remembered those servants sent me books, invited me to come to do programs at the Historical Society, and I would take the people from the community there. And they thought this would never happen. They said, we cannot dream of this happening when we were here. So, yeah, so like I said, I just kept on digging, kept on talking to people, kept interviewing people, and that's what happens. That's the process of a book or any kind of art form that you're going to present. It's the digging. But first, it comes from your heart in terms of you want to do this project. This project is important. This project is a big part of the college that has not been recognized by the college. Because just think, when the founder and his family came to Hollins, they brought maybe 10 enslaved people with them. It couldn't have happened without our ancestors making it happen. There would have been no Hollins for you to go to, for me to go to, had it not been for those people. So it's left up to us to do something about it, to expand, to try to include people who ancestors had gone there and they got no credit for it, who didn't get a scholarship to college like many of the white professors did. And if they had boys, then there was a deal made with college where the young men could go, because Hollins was a female college. But none of that was extended to the people who had made sure that there was a college. None of those privileges. They couldn't even go to the library. They couldn't play basketball. All of these things were restrained from them. And it was upon their shoulders that the college existed and still is today. So it's an amazing story. But it's not a story of just Hollins. It's a story of all over this country. Once I started doing research, for an example, that way of life died out because many colleges were male colleges during that time. UVA, Tech, Princeton, all of these places, Davidson College, had men servants to do these things. But after the Civil War, the men, the first thing they did was change their names. The second thing they did was move away from the South if they could. But women at women colleges weren't as mobile. They had children. They couldn't just move away. And they didn't have skills. Still, they were women. So if you notice in the history of Holland, the men received names. The women were washerwomen. They didn't receive names. Uh, so that's another issue that we have to deal with. What happened to the women? And this was a women's college. So we would think we would expect more of it, but we didn't get it. But we can make it more. We can make it bigger. We can expand um, the gratitude to the women who did all the work, the cooking, the washerwomen, the women who collected the dirty clothes of many faculty members of the young women and took them down to the spring and washed them there. Those women remain nameless. So it is left up to us now to name these nameless people. But that's the history of slavery. That's part of the history of slavery in this country.
I really appreciate you naming that and like expressing that connection because it also is one of the reasons why, like, during, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Holland's Living History Project because I also want to connect to that idea whenever working on it by having an all female cast and by making sure that, like, because I wanted to also connect to that idea. Something that also comes to my mind when thinking about this is the legacy of not only the work that you've done, but also the legacy of enslavement and the generational aspect of this. Because thinking of it, one of the things that like made me really like realize this was because some of the most honest and sweetest and like people who supported me the most while at Hollins were the staff members. And like majority of these staff members were all black and were part of the Hollins community. It was a lot of Hollins community members who were supporting me. And like most of the time it would just be me going to class and like those would be the people who were stopping me and say, keep going. You're doing great. I'm
And you
glad you're
need
here.
that. Mm-hmm.
And like those would be the moments that like just like whenever I was feeling down or whenever I was struggling, it would just be like someone who was just like stopping me to be like, you're doing great today, or just like serving an extra helping of food. It's like I didn't ask for it, or it's like bothering to like learn like what my family recipe was, like, or
Yeah.
like talking to me about what my family recipes were and like sharing notes on it and like bonding over that. So that also like added to the intensity that I felt in wanting to make sure that I'm doing justice to like their family stories and like trying. So like really, whenever I felt it, doing this project, I really wanted to go in depth because I wanted to share as much information as I could about their family. So I'm really interested in like your thoughts whenever going into the legacies of that.
Oh, the families. That's
Mhm.
exactly true. Now, see, progress has already been made. When I was a student there and would try to talk to them, many of them would not talk to me at all because they feared that they or their relatives would lose jobs. Okay. So that you can see that difference already. They're cheering you on. They would say to me, let's say if I was at the post office, we don't know nothing, which is a very common thing. And that is spoken out of fear, kind of thing. So if Mrs. Bruce and Mr. Smith and a few more hadn't talked to me, I would not, it would be a different kind of book. It would have been the research there, but it wouldn't have been the personal storytelling. And to me, that's so important when you're trying to do this.
This will be a 4-part series, so please subscribe and hit the bell. Remember to stay tuned to the podcast so you can watch the full interview. We got a long one for you, but we broke it into chunks for your convenient viewing. You're welcome. But this is a good one, so please stay tuned. Catch each part. It's a good one. We'll see you then. Okay, so whenever we get into protesting and whenever we have conflicts that arise, I feel like there's a pretty stereotypical image that comes into our minds. We're thinking of boots on the ground. We got the people on the front lines who were fighting against the injustice, but There's a lot that goes into protests, and I feel like I've heard a lot of discourse about people underselling the role of art as a form of protest. And as someone from the arts, I gotta put my 2 cents in, y'all. I'm stepping my foot down on this. The art has a place in protest, and a lot of protests would not be as successful without artists. It's a big part, and it's literally an entire field dedicated to protest art. And we've seen this time and time again. We'll talk about specifically, because we're in Black History Month, the Black Arts Movement, which you hear a lot about the Civil Rights Movement. We have the Black Power Movement, but right along with that was the Black Arts Movement, which was kind of like the soul sister to the Black Arts Movement. Black Arts Movement was kind of like the sister to the Black Power Movement, being where it pushed the Black nationalist ideal and had the self-determination of Black people, but pushing it through arts. And it was the collective of Black artists coming together to make protest art and to change the public consciousness of Black people for how to protest, how to make art, and how to move forward as both people and identity, and shaping Black identity towards a new movement. So just as much as we had motions and movements of protest, we also owed it to the artists, like the founder Amiri Baraka, like we have Nikki Giovanni, Audre Lorde. We owe it to all of these artists who were changing minds and creating art that was changing the narrative of what Black people are and can be. And if you're wondering like what these ideals are, it doesn't take much. You can take literally, this is the physical art, the written art, poetry, music, plays, all of this to shape a new culture for Black people during protest. And a big one that sticks out into my mind is a poem from Nikki Giovanni. Just a moment. And if you're wondering where I'm reading this from, this is one of my books, which is In Search of Color Everywhere, a collection of African American poetry, just if you were for your convenient reading. A really good poem that comes to mind when thinking about poetry of this time is looking at Nikki Giovanni's The Women Gather. And excuse my poetry reading voice. The women gather because it is not unusual to seek comfort in our home. In our hours of stress, a man must be buried. It is not unusual that the old bury the young, though it is an abomination. It is not strange that the unwise and the ungentle carry the banner of humaneness, though it is a castration of the spirit. It no longer shatters the intellect that those who make war call themselves diplomats. We are no longer surprised that the unfaithful pray loudest every Sunday in every church, and sometimes in rooms facing east, though it is a sin and a shame. So how do we judge a man? Most of us love from our need to love, not because we find someone deserving. Most of us forgive because we have not trespassed, not because we are magnanimous. Most of us comfort because we need comforting. Our ancient rituals demand that we give in what we hope to receive. And how do we judge a man? We learn to greet when meeting, to cry when parting, and to soften our words at times of stress. The women gather with cloth and ointment, their busy hands bowing to laws that decree willows shall stand swaying but unbroken against even the determined wind of death. We judge a man by his dreams, not alone his deeds. We judge a man by his intent, not alone his shortcomings. We judge a man because it is not unusual to know him through those who love him. The women gather strangers to each other because they have loved a man. It is not unusual to sift through ashes and find an unburnt picture. This is The Women Gather from Nikki Giovanni. And this is the type of poetry that you would see at rallies. This is the type of thing that you would see at whenever people are going to conferences. You would see poets standing up. Poets would be the activists who are going, the same people who are going trying to make legislation. You would see poets standing up on the stand, reading this poetry, making changes at legislation. Like, artists had an active role in making changes in policy. And these poets were essential. The artists were essential. You would have protest art that is changing people's minds. So I feel like we can't underscore how significant art is and how subversive art is and continues to be. It still has a role. I feel like everyone sees that meme, has seen that video of the guy with the saxophone, where it's like no one touches the bar, the guy who plays the saxophone, while everyone is like throwing tear gas. And meanwhile, we have the man who's like bang. Artists are just as brave as the rest of the people who were holding the picket signs and who were marching. They have a role to play, just like everyone else. And that's something that's so important to remember, that you have something that you can do. Whether it is selling your tickets for your shows and donating your proceeds to fund the next protest, whether it is writing, using your art, going up on stand and reading your poetry out, making a play that like breaks. Hey, plenty of artists have been arrested. Let's not forget one of the things that's so important. Like we have the Dred Scott, who is an artist, who literally as part of his art piece, he burnt the flag as part of his art piece. And that's what led to the repealing of the law that said that you can burn a flag as a sign of protest. Now that's been repealed now in the current administration, but that change in legislation was a part of an art display. It is artists that have changed legislation. It's also an artist who demonstrated how hard it was to withstand the pressure of a full water hose, to know what it was like to be fighting against a water hose from a fire truck during the civil rights. Did that as a performance piece to make people realize you need to think about what your art is and what you want to do with your art, but your art is a method of resistance. Art has changed laws and continues to do so. People can be scared of you, and that's okay. You don't be scared of you. You know your potential. You know what you can do. And that's just from one artist to another. You have your back. Okay, so I've been hearing some chatter about the role of minorities in protest, and especially about the role of Black people when protesting. Now, I'm not a monolith. I don't speak for all. I feel like even having to say that disclaimer is a little reductive, but I've already said it. But Black people have been protesting for a long time. Like, we have been fighting for a long time. So, in general, I understand the notion that people be tired. Like, honestly, just out of personal experience, working at, like, when, like, going to school at a PWI, trying to change, like, old policies, by 1 year, I was exhausted. I was already tired. And then I still had to, like, push for policies. And I was only making, like, pushing for policies just to make life easier for myself, trying to push like policies that were reductive and were racist and change institutional things. That was already exhausting enough. But because I was already doing the work, people were already coming to me and saying like, oh, well, can you be on this committee, this committee, this committee? Can you be at this discussion? Meanwhile, that puts you at increased risk because it's like, yes, I love to help. I want to help as many people as possible because I just feel like that's a good thing to do. I want the world to be better. But also have been at increased risk and have been targeted in settings where I did not feel safe. I was not protected. But yes, I want to help people, but it's like I was not feeling safe even to share and to be able to reach out. So, like, even from my personal experience, I understand the idea of exhaustion because something like to understand is that it takes a lot for a Black person and for a minority in general to step up and to reach out. Okay, that's already a lot to be able to stand up. So, whenever you're speaking for another group, you're already at an increased risk. Like, you're already kind of like feel like you have a target on your back because you kind of do. Like, I already get that. So it comes with increased exhaustion to be standing up for yourself as well as standing up for others because the target was already there. And now you kind of have to, now you're already trying to navigate for yourself, but now you're navigating it for someone else. And speaking up for yourself about problems, a lot of times it felt easier just to be quiet and just like, I'll just shut up and like deal with this, even though it's harmful to me. I'm just dealing with it because trying to educate and explain why this is bad just puts even more of a target on my back. Like that, I get that. So I feel like there's something like missing whenever you're talking about this idea that you must speak up. You must be the voice of reason. You don't owe anyone anything. And honestly, that's the wrong mindset, because when you go in with like this debt mentality, like I feel like we touched on this in a previous episode, but like nobody likes to be told to do anything. And already you've kind of messed up your goodwill. You've already lost your goodwill when you go in with the mentality of, you owe me. I have helped you before, you must help me now. That's not how goodwill works. That's not how acts of charity work. That's not how exchange works. Because if you go that game, then people are constantly helping each other and exchanging help with each other. So whenever you're doing that, you're already acting in bad faith, and you're not getting anywhere. You're stopping the progress, you're stopping the conversation already right there. And honestly, I think the discussion and the conversation that Sumna Show had like discussed and how he brought this topic up, really kind of agree with the way that he had discussed it. Really speaks volume to how this conversation is being had, and honestly is a more valid way of approaching this, because I get it. Black people are tired, and that's valid. I also understand the fact that if we don't move, then it's going to come back to us like 10 times harder. So, like, understand that part of it too. There's always going to be more problems. Like, understand both protecting your energy, but also the fact that if you don't act, it's going to come back. But also that no one has the right to demand action of you. That's not how goodwill works. So, really, instead of saying, why aren't you acting? Like, instead of saying, you should be here, why are you not here? The question really should be, well, why are you not here right now? And not from a judgmental place, and not from a like, well, you should have been here, but saying, why? And having a conversation and starting there. And why do you want Black people to be here so bad? And examining that desire first. I feel like then we would have a better place to start a conversation. I feel that we need to re-examine like what it means to be a revolutionary. Like what it even means to like even be someone of like importance and contribution. Like I feel like whenever Black History Month rolls around, like especially when we were a kid, like the only three people like pop up. It's like MLK and then Rosa Parks. And then that was practically it. That was like maybe get a Maya Angelou. Like we got like the select three people that they like talked about, and then like they moved on. Like part of that's just the struggle of the education system, but like it's also I feel like a struggle of the mindset around what it means to be a prominent figure in history, what it means to be significant to history. And I feel like that's something that we really need to like re-examine, both like as a society, but like also within ourselves, of what it means to be a success and to have a contribution to society. Because for starters, those are not the only people who contributed to the civil rights movement. Like, but even the fact of like what we know of them, like when we look at Rosa Parks and how we examine that success story, it's like that was not just a spontaneous moment. That was meticulous planning. Rosa was already a civil rights activist far before sitting on a bus seat. And the fact that, like, now people are realizing, like, oh, there was a Claudette Colvin. Like, people are realizing more now. But there's so much to know and to examine in the reason why we know about a Rosa Parks but not a Claudette Colvin. And to think of the significance of that. As well as the fact of, like, examining why these people are who we know as the revolutionaries. Like, why is it that, like, Malcolm X is propped up? Like, Malcolm X and MLK are placed in opposition of each other. And we're often told that, like, Martin Luther King, he's the good one. Like, he was peaceful. Malcolm X, that's violence. When it's really just talking about self-defense. Whereas also, we also don't hear as much about the women who were part of the civil rights. Like, it's not like you hear as much about the women who, their wives, or hear about the women who were supporting during, who were playing active roles in the civil rights movement. This was the fact of, like, this did not begin or end with the civil rights movement, you know? And something I think of a lot that, like, goes back to, like, my own time doing research, and also a thought that came to me while talking with Ethel was during my own project of, like, examining the history of those who were enslaved. um, During the creative portion, made period accurate clothing, and there was this huge, that was pretty much the biggest part of the project, was people were really up in arms about the idea of wearing period accurate clothing, like that's a sign of disrespect for us as actors to be wearing period accurate, to be wearing clothes that those were enslaved wore. That and, like, the concern that was brought to me was that wearing those clothes would somehow diminish the status of the Black women who were going to be in the play. That by wearing the garments of our ancestors, they would lose their current status, that they would lose the respect that they have. And I feel like we really need to break apart what saying that really means. That saying that really is like putting in that, like, that's somehow less than, when really I'm like, whenever I was reading through the archives, going through, I'm like, these people were amazing. Like, I'm just like, our ancestors were amazing and were so resilient. Like, even just think, like, I don't feel ashamed when I think about, like, my parents and I think about my grandparents picking cotton and picking strawberries. I think that's amazing. Like, I can't do that. Like, low-key, like, my stamina is terrible. Like, no complaints. They're like, life was, like, hard. It was rough. But no one talks about that. No one thinks, but they're like, literally, my grandma would be like, I'm never touching a piece of cotton again in my life. And, like, she swore to that. She never did. But, like, me, I'm like, that's, she's so strong. Like, that's, like, she was such an impressive person. But I don't feel ashamed that she did that. I know that there's pain behind that story, but I don't feel ashamed of that story. And, like, I feel the same way whenever I look at, like, the history of those who were enslaved. That was an amazing period. Like, it's horrible that this happened, but the people who were there, the perseverance, without them, I would not be here. That contribution, the strength, that perseverance, it's painful. Like, there were multiple moments where I wanted to cry and break down, where I did cry and break down. But then afterwards, after I collected myself, I was still amazed at how strong the people were, how strong my ancestors were. So I felt proud. If anything, I felt like that was the weight. Like, those clothing felt heavier. But the last thing I was like, that is crazy. The idea that I would feel less than by wearing or being reminded of where I came from is the craziest notion to me. So I feel like there isn't any idea that would make me feel lesser. And I feel like every contribution, like, being revolutionary isn't something that's flashy. Like, it's going to work every day. It's taking care of your kids. It's being the mom who, like, pushed away her dreams so that she could raise her kids. It's the one who took extra shifts. Like, to me, that's being revolutionary. It's the going out. It's supporting, like, even in moments of, like, protest and strife, it's the people who were making sure people got fed. It's people who are taking care of their homes, taking care of their community. It's that auntie that you could go to who always had an extra meal, who, even though she may not have had, like, enough money for herself, she always saved and made sure that the other kids ate. Like, to me, that is what revolution is. It's taking care of each other. It's those hardships that make you amazing. And to me, being revolutionary doesn't mean that you get written down. Like, we've known from this history, majority of the people that I've studied and the people that I've seen, their names aren't even written down. Like, they don't have names. But they're more impressive than any of the people I've seen who have plaques and who have statues dedicated to them. I feel like we need to examine, like, whenever you're looking at your own life and the people around you, being amazing, being revolution, making contributions, you don't know how great your contribution to your life, to other people's lives are going to be. But do not forget that the small things that you are doing right now could be life-changing to someone else. Okay, guys, thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Current Culture Podcast. I will see you in the next episode. Like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.